Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Recently, Evergreen's lodging in the Suez Canal has been pretty widely covered in the news. It's still too early to know the full extent of what happened, but what we do know is that this massive container ship, which fully loaded displaces as much as all four Iowa-class battleships combined, somehow ran aground in the Suez Canal in such a way that she wedged in sideways, completely blocking the canal to traffic in both directions. Something like 10% of global trade goes through the Suez Canal. And so at that point, we started to see ships stacking up on each side in the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf, and even saw ships diverting to the Cape of Good Hope, which they normally do not need to go through because the Suez Canal is a quicker route. So today, we want to talk a little bit about Navy ships going through canals, battleships' relationship with canals, and Battleship New Jersey's relationship with the Panama Canal in particular. First off, U.S. Navy warships don't tend to use the Suez Canal. Aircraft carriers do, and some battleships have on occasion, but it's not a very common thing like it is with the Panama Canal. For the Panama Canal, that allows the U.S. Navy to transit rapidly from the Atlantic to the Pacific, which is where our two main fleets are based. That way, we can defend either coast of the country. That's how it was originally envisioned by Teddy Roosevelt, that we have one battle fleet, at that time comprised of battleships. It's a huge national investment. But we have two coasts that we have to defend, and we've got potential enemies on each coast. So, depending on where the war is declared, you need to be able to rapidly transit that fleet. This was particularly brought home during the Spanish-American War in 1898, when the battleship Oregon was the lone battleship on the Pacific coast, and we really needed her in the Caribbean to fight the Spanish. So Oregon had to make an epic run from the Pacific Northwest through the Straits of Magellan at the south end of South America, and then back up through the Caribbean. On her way through the Caribbean to join the American battle fleet, the Spanish fleet could have easily intercepted her and destroyed essentially 1/4 of the U.S. Navy's modern battleship force in one run, and that would have made later battles much more even. Fortunately, McKinley's Bulldog was able to get all the way around and rejoin the American fleet, but it really highlighted the need for a canal. The Panama Canal is central to later battleship development, both because it dictates the size American ships can be built to, and because it helps offset the number of ships we need. We no longer need ships able to be in both oceans at the same time, so we can build a single fleet of ships and have it transiting around. And that whole mindset is different now. We deployed task forces to different parts of the world, and so we've got a couple of them out at all times, and some of them are forward based, and they each have different areas of operation. So if there is a hotspot that pops up in this part of the world or that part of the world, we can send one or more task forces there that are already more or less local. Because we do things differently, the Panama Canal is not so important. In fact, our modern supercarriers don't even fit through it anymore. That's fine because they tend to be forward deployed. We're not shuffling them as a fleet from one ocean to the next. And that's probably part of the consideration that went into giving the Panama Canal back to the country Panama, or technically it was to them for the first time since its inception. It had been run by the United States as a critical national asset. So battleships like New Jersey were designed to be able to fit through it because that was the type of warfare that was predicted at that time. That's no longer the way we do things, and so modern capital ships can be built larger and don't necessarily need to be able to transit it. That said, in the 80s, the Iowa-class battleships do on occasion transit the Panama Canal. we'll get back to that later. Uh, Going back to the Suez Canal, some of the Great White Fleet, at a minimum, goes through the Suez Canal during their round-the-world trip, and Iowa-class battleship USS Missouri goes through the Suez Canal during her around-the-world trip in the 80s. Otherwise, I can't think of any other U.S. battleships in the Suez Canal. It's not nearly so critical for us as it is for them. Typically, our Atlantic fleet-based ships tend to come out into the Atlantic and go as far as the Mediterranean, and our Pacific fleet-based ships tend to go out into the Pacific and Indian Ocean, and so they rarely have to transit the Suez Canal between them. So, let's talk about the various occasions on which Battleship New Jersey went through the Panama Canal. First would have been in 1944, when she was transiting from the Atlantic, where she was built and did her initial deployments, to the Pacific to take over as Fifth Fleet flagship. Iowa-class battleships are designed to be just a little over 108 feet wide, where the Panama Canal at that time was 110 feet wide. So they had a little bit less than a foot of clearance on each side. They also have drain pipes and buffers, like crushable metal round cylinders welded onto the sides of the ship, which you will see. So when you're looking at the width of Iowa-class battleships, you're going to see a dozen different widths, depending on which website you go to, and that is with or without these various attachments on the side. The drain pipe extenders that stick out of the side of the ship can be unbolted and removed prior to going through the Panama Canal. But even with this, like I said, there's less than a foot of clearance on each side. It's quite common for these ships to scrape the edges as they go through. The modern Panama Canal has been widened to about 180 feet, but they only allow vessels up to 160 feet, so they are requiring a much greater margin of error than the Iowas had back in the day. New Jersey's second time going through the Panama Canal was post-war, when she comes back to join the Atlantic Fleet. She would be mothballed at Bayonne, New Jersey, and then when she would be brought back during the Korean War, she and the other four Iowas were all home ported in Norfolk. That seems incredibly stupid because we're fighting the Korean War in Korea, but Norfolk had the facilities for these vessels, and so they were home ported there, and because we had the Panama Canal, they were able to pretty rapidly transit into the Pacific. Interestingly, they do sail down to the Panama Canal and go all the way across the Pacific, rather than going around the other way. So New Jersey, once in 1951 on her way to Korea, and then again later that year on her way home from Korea. And then in 53, when she goes back for her second Korean War deployment, and again at the end of that deployment, returning to her home port in Norfolk. The next time she transited the Panama Canal, in 1957, she's decommissioned. She has just been recommissioned at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and she goes through the Panama Canal on her way to Long Beach to receive her final equipment fittings before deploying to Vietnam. When she comes back from Vietnam, she is mothballed in Bremerton, Washington, alongside Battleship Missouri, which has been there since 1955, at the end of her Korean War active period. So at this point, we have two active battleships each on the East Coast and the West Coast, and it seems like the concept of the Panama Canal is dead. We've started to transition to fast carrier task forces that can deploy where needed, and less so fleet engagements where the whole thing as a unit has to go out. However, in 1982, New Jersey becomes the first Iowa recommission. She's recommissioned at Long Beach again. And meanwhile, Iowa is being reactivated at Pascagoula. New Jersey had a head start with reactivation, and because she had served during the Vietnam War, she was more modern. So it took longer to get Iowa ready. So they were supposed to have one each, Atlantic and Pacific. Iowa just wasn't ready to go yet, So when a flare-up happened in Beirut, New Jersey was sent over to participate in the Lebanese Civil War. So she had to transit through the Panama Canal once then in 1983, and again in 1984 when Iowa finally comes online and New Jersey goes back to become the Pacific Fleet's battleship. And at this point, she is given a battleship battle group, just like a carrier battle group, and she begins to operate like a carrier. And so you do not see any of the Iowa-class battleships transiting the Panama Canal at that point. In the end, New Jersey and Missouri are again mothballed in Bremerton, and Iowa and Wisconsin are both mothballed here on the East Coast. So that brings us around to 1999. We are about to give the Panama Canal back to Panama. And the United States Navy is looking to dispose of 2 of the Iowas and keep just 2. They want one on the Atlantic and one on the Pacific. However, the 2 most decorated vessels, Missouri and New Jersey, are both on the Pacific. And the state of New Jersey wants New Jersey, and both the city of Bremerton and the city of Honolulu want Missouri. So the Navy, before they give control to Panama, because they have to tow these ships inactive and dead and unable to steer on their own, hurriedly swaps New Jersey and Iowa, so that then Iowa and Wisconsin are being stored one on each coast, and Missouri and New Jersey are able to go to where they will eventually be opened up as museums. The move to swap Iowa and New Jersey was the most expensive ship transit of the Panama Canal ever, because 1, these ships are so large, and 2, they are dead. They cannot navigate on their own. They cannot be self-propelled. So if something goes wrong, like what happened with Evergreen, there's the Panama Canal. And it was critical that the United States do this before the country of Panama takes over, because that they would probably not allow such a risky maneuver to happen with their new national asset. So the state of New Jersey paid for that move, even though the Navy hadn't officially chosen where the battleship was going to be displayed yet. They had to do it before Panama took over. So the ship was brought here to the Philadelphia Navy Yard and held until the Navy decided that she was coming to Camden. And so, throughout her career, Battleship New Jersey transited the Panama Canal 10 times, which may be among the most of any warship. I'd be interested in seeing what some other numbers are. So, dead ship tow is dangerous. How is a live ship tow safer? Well, with Navy ships in particular, you have massive crews, at least 3 times the size of what any commercial vessel has. And these crews, much like their merchant marine counterparts, are very technically trained in all the ship's systems. But when a Navy ship is going into or out of port, or going through a canal or some other restricted waterway like that, you do what's called setting the special sea detail, which is very similar to general quarters, except you're not manning weapons. You are manning all of your important equipment. As you know, Murphy's Law, if something can go wrong, it will, and it will go wrong at the worst possible time. Usually, ships suffer mechanical failures when they're going through a restricted waterway, and they end up blocking the channel to a port or blocking the entire Suez Canal. So, to mitigate that as much as possible, Special Sea Detail has technically experienced sailors in all sorts of spaces like engineering and auxiliary steering compartments, so that if you lose the electrical linkages to steer the ship, you can take over from aft steering, where you've literally got a wheel plugged into the hydraulic rams, and still manage to steer the ship if needed. Likewise, if you lose power, you've got people standing around to be able to bring power back up so that you don't just start drifting and let the current take you ashore. And so I'm not entirely sure if merchant ships have an equivalent to the Special Sea Detail, if they do something similar, but merchant ships have such smaller crews, and in many cases are significantly larger than their naval counterparts, Like, Evergreen is the weight of all 4 Iowa-class battleships put together when she's fully loaded. She's only a little bit longer, only a little bit wider, but significantly heavier. So, they just don't have the manpower on a ship like that to be able to man all the systems, and particularly have technically experienced people in all of these spaces. And so it becomes a critical issue. And honestly, it's surprising that it doesn't happen more often. Thank you guys for watching. Have you ever been on a ship going through a canal? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other sources, including institutions and viewers like you. Viewers like you have directly supported the channel, and that has allowed us to making these videos a significantly larger part of our jobs here. That allows us to make more of them. So your support has allowed us to go from making 1 video a week to multiple. Check the link in the description if you'd like to support the museum or our channel in particular. And remember, like, share, and subscribe so that you're notified when all these videos are going up. Thanks for watching.